We are in John chapter 13. As we've opened that book, as we've begun to study it, Jesus has washed the feet of the disciples. And there's a lot there, isn't there, for us, teachings to us and how we serve one another. But not to be overlooked is God's involvement in the lives of the common men. These were disciples of Jesus, yes, but he washes their feet, knowing full well what is going to happen to him in the very near future. And we are down to days from Jesus' crucifixion. He girds a towel about himself and he washes their feet. In verse 21 through 30, Jesus portrays or predicts, prophesies, if you will, Judas's betrayal. And in verse 21, he says, John tells us Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified. What is he troubled about? We saw a similar phraseology in John chapter 12 and verse 27. Now my soul is troubled, what shall I say? As you read the surrounding verses, he is talking about his own imminent death. The pain, the suffering that'll go along with that. The betrayal, the being alone. To the point that he will even cry out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He felt as though God had forsaken him. We know God did not forsake him on the cross. But we go from that to a very similar description, troubled in his spirit. And Jesus says here it's not concerning his death. His concern is one of you will betray me. Is it the betrayal that will hurt him so, or is it what the choice that Judas has made? I see here that Jesus is concerned about Judas' decisions, choices, future, death, as much as he is his own, if not more so. How can I say that? Has Jesus' future been changed? Has his purpose for coming been changed? Has the plans of God to save the world been derailed or changed? And none of that has. But consider the life of Judas. Because of his choices, his immediate future will be changed dramatically, powerfully, painfully. And more important than that, his eternal future is going to be changed. So is God concerned about our future? Even the future of Judas? I have to say absolutely. And Jesus grieves here for Judas. When we got to verse 27 of chapter 13, I raised the question, is this a frightening verse? Is this a scary verse? Because it says, then after he had taken the morsel, Judas has taken a morsel of bread that has been dipped and given to him by Jesus from the hand of Jesus. And it says that after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. And Jesus says, what you are going to do quickly. And so I ask, is it a frightening verse? Because oftentimes our thought will go, well, if Satan can enter into Judas, having walked with Jesus for years, sitting at the table. Jesus is right there. What of me? What hope is there for me?
Here's another one. Job, when God said, told Satan, you can't kill Job, and Satan killed his family around him.
Yeah.
So here's another thought. Can Satan kill you?
So, and that, all of that, Job's life and circumstances are brought to mind. Do we need to be afraid?
Yes. Yes.
I got one yes.
It's not a cartoon. It's for real.
We do fear evil. But here's the thing. We looked at verse 2 where Satan has prompted Judas. He's put an idea into his head. Can Satan do that? I think so. Listen, my wife can plant an idea in my head. My children can plant an idea in my head. My grandchildren will give me thoughts that I never considered before. In a good way. What comes to mind is me taking them out to the sand dunes and being 30 feet up and saying, "Jump, John, jump." And he did, and he tumbled down and got up and said, "Let's do it again, Daddy." And I brought him home, and my wife says, "What happened to him? What did you do to my son?" Our children can put thoughts into our head.
I'm wondering, like, when does he put thoughts into your head and put thoughts into somebody else's head? Do we do it all the time, or does he know? Like, how is he? Like, when does he?
One of my biggest comforts.
He's not omnipotent.
No, Satan is not omnipotent. And listen, if Satan can put a thought into my head, and that's an if, that's not real power, because the television, which is totally inanimate, can place a thought into my head. That's not sin. Jesus was tempted by Satan. Step from here and prove that you're God. The angels will say, and if it wasn't a temptation, if Jesus had never really thought about it even, it wouldn't have been a temptation. Did Jesus sin? No, temptation isn't sin. Here's the thing. We see Judas going from a thought, and this is true for everybody, I believe. We think about, and if it's wrong, we stop and we justify. And we work very hard why this is okay for me in my situation. But we know it's not. That's why we're working so hard to figure out a way that it's okay. And I use the idea of walking in a bank and seeing a whole drawer full of cash and thinking, boy, it'd be really nice if it was in my pocket. It's not my money, and I know it's not my money, and I'm not going to think about that very long. Because usually what sin does, and the justification process is, why is this right? How much fun would this be? Now, I don't want to talk about getting caught, because that's shame and that's embarrassment. That's going to harm my church, my family, my children, my grandchildren, my friends. We won't think about that. So we're going to the point of justification, why it's okay. Well, I could give money to the hospital, and I could save children from cancer, and I could steal enough money that I could pay off the church bill, and all these good things I could do with stolen money. And there's Satan working, but he's working. It's our choice. And then we get to the decision point. Judas had made it to the decision point. Jesus says, what you're going to do it quickly. So the decision's been made, and there's planning already in process. We're going to read that he leaves Jesus immediately and goes out into the darkness. Well, it's nighttime. He's not going to go down to the temple and meet with the religious leaders, but he knows where they are, apparently. There's planning been done. And now we're at the decision point. And all of that, in fact, none of that points to the power of Satan. Satan put an idea there. What all of that points to is Judas's choices. Very bad decisions. Every step of the way. Let's justify this action. Let's figure out how we can do it secretly so that we don't bring shame to ourselves. And so, for me, verse 27, chapter 13 of John, is not a frightening verse because Satan enters him. He has been invited by Judas.
So this reminds me of James, chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. And can I read it?
Yes.
Okay. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death.
James chapter 1. This, I think, is a very good picture of what it means, what James chapter 1 means. That evil desire came out of Judas's heart, not Satan. Satan gets no credit for this. It is the choices that Judas has made.
And sometimes can we, try to, well, Satan made me do this, and we're not really.
That's not taking responsibility. Right. Satan made me do it. Listen, I'm convinced that one of Satan's greatest inroads to the human heart is getting us to believe that Satan is dressed up in a red suit with a long tail and little pitchforks and horns. And that's not very dangerous looking, is it? It's it used to be, I don't know if it still is, on a little tuna can. That it's a comic.
Devil's hand.
Huh?
It's the devil's hand, isn't it?
I don't. Spam? I don't know. But it's not. It's the idea that Satan isn't dangerous. And we face that idea every day. Sin is portrayed as entertainment. It's not dangerous. We laugh at it.
But okay, let's say that you have there's a sign on the highway, about this, how good alcohol is and all this.
Yes.
Stuff. Well, man made that sign. Do we tempt each other, by our actions? We put that temptation out there in front of us, and then the person has to decide what action he's going to take. If I'm
Temptation is everywhere.
Yeah.
And it comes from man. It comes from entertainment, if you will. It comes from within our own hearts. We're tempted. But don't be so afraid of Satan that you're paralyzed. I don't want to go out and get his attention by doing good because Satan will come attack me. You don't need to fear that. The issue Judas had came from his own choices. And those choices very much affected his future.
Yeah, I think this is where we talk about fleshly desires, right? Versus laying up our treasures in heaven. They're just the two different ends of the spectrum.
So it's very important that you don't take the first step. And God gave us everything we need to defend against Satan. Do not forget, you have the God-given ability to reason, to think, to understand right and wrong. You have a lifetime of experiences. The armor of God. The armor of God. If you're not sure, you can go to God and put on that armor and defend. So be aware of Satan. Be aware what it cost Judas. Though he was sitting in the presence, now he's living in darkness. He leaves Jesus and immediately goes out. And even that step, he had a choice. Jesus says, here's the morsel of bread. You know the prophecy. Take it, and Judas does. And he says, now, what you're going to do it quickly. Judas should have said, you know. You know?
Yeah, because I was thinking on that particular verse, there again, Judas had another opportunity.
Yes.
He had another opportunity to ask for forgiveness,
Right.
cancel out what he was wanting to do. with
Right.
his mind. He had an opportunity to change his mind.
That's the thing. Opportunities. Good point. He walked with Jesus for years. He served him. He observed him. He worshiped him. He knew him. Opportunities to make the right choices. It doesn't end here. He still has opportunities. Jesus goes forward knowing what he's going to do and meets Judas. He turns himself over and he questions Judas. You're going to betray the Son of Man with a kiss. Sign of friendship, loyalty, acceptance, love, compassion, understanding. You're going to see. And he had an opportunity. So when we ask, why didn't Jesus go after Judas? He did. All of Judas's life. He did. He gave him every proof. He gave him all the time he needed to understand. Be aware of Satan. I'm not sure we need to be afraid. And that can carry different. But be aware of what our choices lead to. Jesus glorifies the Father and the Father glorifies His Son. Verses 31 and 32. When he had gone out, when Judas had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. And my brain gets tangled up in that sometimes. Jesus glorifies the Father, and the Father will glorify the Son. He does say, now is the Son of Man glorified. Judas is about to put something into place, into motion, that Judas will not be able to stop. God is not going to stop it. And Jesus will say, for this purpose I came to this hour. This is why I came. So how is it that God the Father and God the Son are going to be glorified? What is coming is the cross. You remember when Jesus was raised, when Lazarus was raised, Jesus raises Lazarus from the tomb. He will tell Martha, who is still grieving after days of the loss of her brother, standing before the tomb, did I not tell you, Martha, that you would see, if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And what she saw was her brother coming out of the tomb. We often think of glorified Jesus or glorified God as the throne room scene. And it's glorious. I'm with you. But how is Jesus glorified? It's the cross. How is God glorified? It's the cross. Now, as I'm going through that storm, I may not see and understand how the cross glorifies God. But today, we know by this the world might be saved. John will say, or Jesus will say in John chapter 5, verse 37, the Father who sent me has himself bore witness about me. The cross bears witness about the life of Jesus, how he died, for what purpose he died, the grave that he was buried in. The cross bears witness about, when you think of the cross, Jesus is no longer on the cross. Christmas time, we love the manger scene. It's everywhere, but Jesus is no longer in the manger. Why? Jesus came, that was his purpose, that was a purpose, but he's not there. He grew up and he changed the world. Jesus is no longer on the cross. Why? That purpose has been saved. The same way where he laid in the manger was, that purpose was served. Don't overlook the fact that the cross represents God's involvement in our lives. He cares. He is involved. He provides. Even for your future. We okay? Hopefully we're encouraged. I'm trying to encourage you this morning. Verse 34 and 35, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. If I meet you on the street and I ask you to tell me what love is, you may stumble for some words. This morning I want you to consider that love is something that flows from one to another. For God so loved the world that he gave. Verse 17, John 3:16, verse 17, so that the world might be saved. You see God's love flowing from himself to you, to me. John 13, verse 2, John will tell us that Jesus loved them to the end, the disciples. All of the disciples, even Judas. He loves them to the end. His love flows from one to another. Paul,
Also use 1 Corinthians 13.
I think we can easily go to 1 Corinthians 13 and stay there for the rest of the class. And that's, as we think about what love is, Jesus says, a new commandment I give you. What's the new part? Just as I have loved you. Now he just finished washing the disciples' feet. Do you know what I've done to you? You are to do to one another. Serve one another with humility and patience and kindness. It's what the fact that the Son of God has done for them, for you. He humbled himself. He obeyed even to the point of death. This is how we serve one another. It should be a serving love. And so if we think about how important love is in our lives, Jesus says, a new command I give you. It's not an option. Think for a moment in your mind of a church. Not the church building. The church is the people. Think about an assembly of people who have come together to worship God, to worship Christ, to remember, to study, to obey, to learn, to seek forgiveness. That's the church. They are doctrinally sound, meaning that they abide by God's Word. They don't deviate from it. They strive to make every effort to understand and to do. They are right. But now in your mind's eye, recognize that love is not present in that assembly of people. They care for themselves. Is it possible for this church that's in our mind to be the true church of God? Is it possible for this church without love to be pleasing to God? To be the church that God, the people that God died for on the cross? It's not possible. So how important is this love? It's everything. What Judas did, he did not do out of love. What did it cost Judas? Each of us want to be significant. We want our lives to mean something, to make a difference in those that we love, those that we meet, those that we interact with. And Judas gave up all of that by his choices. Satan didn't take it from him. John 13:36, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answers, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now. You will follow me afterwards. Very similar to what he said in verse 33. Same thing I told the Jews, I am now also going to say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. Where and why? If this is this close, if these verses are this close to the death of Christ, the teaching of Christ is involved here, He is doing it's important we understand fully. So where and why? Where is He going that you cannot go? He's going to a spiritual destination. Why is He going there? His hour had come. For this purpose I came to this world. He's going there as part of the plan of God to save the world. Why can't they come? I suggest to you that it's because their hour has not yet come. There's work they need to do. There's people they need to teach, interact with, plant seeds in their hearts. There are things that must be done. Not the least of which they must mature. Because when we get to verse 37, the very next verse, Peter says, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus will ask a question. Peter, will you lay down your life for me? What's the answer? Now keep in mind, I think Peter is simply trying to say, I am loyal to you. I've been loyal to you. I'm going to be loyal to you. Peter is the one, when we get to Jesus' arrest, will draw a sword and attack. So he may actually believe this.
But he still had limitations and boundaries because he also denied Christ 3 times also.
He will deny it before the cock crows. This night, you will deny me 3 times. So the answer is no, you won't lay down your life for me. But at the same time, we know the end of the story. Did Peter lay down his life for Jesus? Yes, he did. Jesus says, put away your sword. If you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Peter didn't want to die by the sword. Peter wanted to die for Jesus, in Jesus, following Jesus, teaching Jesus. Is that what Peter did? Yes.
But do you think at that particular point in time, he had that mindset of a physical kingdom?
Probably the mindset of a physical kingdom, probably the mindset of how many children do you see with a sword or a gun and they're going to defeat the dragon who stands 10 stories above their head, and they can do it. So there's also the idea of maturity. It's not Peter's time. It's not Nathaniel's time. It's not Judas's time, but Judas made some choices. There are things that they must do.
Even the way he asked the question as a parent, like any parent, the way that he asked the question, you hear it like a little kid's voice when he's like, why can't I follow you now? Right?
Yes.
I mean, it really is the maturity level.
A portion of it is a maturity level. And we don't like it, but we may see it in the mirror when, why do I have to go through this? This is hard. God says, I'm involved in your life. I've provided for your needs. I've provided for your future. You need to go through this. And we are reminded, count it all joy when you endure hardship and struggle. And we go, do I have to? So for me, this also illustrates, one, it's an important question for Peter. Are you really going to lay? It's important for us to answer the same question. But thinking about Peter's maturity, Paul will say in chapter 12 of Romans in verse 3, for the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith God has given him, you and I. We don't think more highly of ourselves than we ought, but think with sober judgment. Don't think with less. Because what I often hear when we're talking about church work and stretching and growing and doing is, I can't do that. I can't lead a class. I can't lead a project. I can't stand up in the marketplace and interact with individuals and call attention to the love of God. I can't tell. I'm scared. I'm embarrassed. All these I can't. That's not sober judgment, because who gave you the abilities that you have? God. God says go and do so you can. So I think Peter's trying to express loyalty, but Paul voices a great deal of wisdom in my life not to think more highly of myself than I ought, but think with sober judgment and do what I can. And listen, you're going to learn, I'm going to learn from my failures as much as I learn from my teaching, from my successes. John chapter 14, if we're okay to move on. Verse 1, let not your hearts be troubled. Their hearts are troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. That scripture can be translated as you believe in God, now also believe in me. Same thing, both apply to our lives. Isn't that the message of this entire book? We're 13 chapters in, starting the 14th chapter. Isn't that the message? Believe in God, believe in me. It is. All summed up right there. Jesus immediately gives two reasons why they should not be troubled. One, he's going to prepare a place for him. And in the next few verses, he's also going to tell us the Spirit will come. So faith. I don't know how to separate what John means with belief and following. How do you separate that? How do you separate trust and faith? How do you separate faith and belief? It's all involved together. And Peter will say in 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, casting all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. There's a reason we have faith and we believe. God's given us the ability to recognize that. When we're able to do that, and for me, I take pleasure in the phrase, let go and let God. Because I know how hard it is for some of you to let go. Some of you. It's a nightmare, he said. But when you do, trust me, and if you managed to do this in the past, simply let go and let God. I believe, I trust, I have faith. And I consider the turmoil, the storm that Mary went through, and how hard it must have been to let go and let God as she watches her son die on a cross, a cruel cross. When we're able to do that, maybe you can draw back from some experience, but trust me, to simply turn things over to God, there's a confidence, there's a comfort that's indescribable in your soul. Jesus troubled in His soul at this time. If you're looking for comfort in your soul, let go and let God. Believe in God, then believe in me, is what Jesus is saying. This is not a new teaching. This is not a new expectation from God. We can go all the way back hundreds of years. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 17 through 20. I've put it on your page. But notice what it says. There is a horde, there's a great army coming against Judah. There's a great army. And there's the question of what are we to do? And God's words to the prophets to be given to the people, God's words, God's intent, God's plan is this. Verse 17, chapter 20, 2 Chronicles. You will not need to fight in this battle. Wow. Judas, you will not need to fight in this battle. You don't need to take part. You have a part. You have a responsibility. God's words to the prophets, given to the people, stand firm. Hold your position. And see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. Do we see that in the cross? Is it obvious in the cross? He ends this small section, verse 20, believe in the Lord your God and you will be established. We want to be significant. Believe in the Lord God. Believe His prophets and you will succeed. We have the words of God's prophets in our laps. Jesus will tell His disciples, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. The troubled heart came from what? Somebody mentioned it earlier. Don't you think maybe they were still thinking physical world, physical life, a kingdom, a messianic kingdom that would endure forever, would conquer the world? Very possibly so. And if that's what you're thinking, and Jesus has just told you, I'm leaving, where does that leave you? Where does that leave the kingdom? How is this going to be? It's all going down the drain. Now what should I do? Reason for trouble? What's your best response? Draw a sword? Start the battle without Him? Don't recommend it. Let go and let God. You believe in God, believe also in me. And that's what John is teaching over and over and over again. Follow Him. He's right there. Ask him, what must I do? Verse 2, I go and prepare a place for you. Oh, my time's running out. Your version may say, and you may have heard preached, God's preparing a mansion for you. And then you may have heard it preached, God's preparing a room for you. Does it matter? It doesn't matter to me because it's in my Father's house. That's what Jesus says. Verse 2. In my Father's house. A literal translation of that is dwelling place. And it's used as a traveler throughout Scripture, as a traveler going to, and they need a place to dwell overnight. Temporary dwelling place. I like the idea, I like the terminology. It gives me a comfort, I guess, as resting place can also be its translation. And I choose resting place because in Hebrews 4 verse 9, the writer says, so then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. In verse 11, he continues with that thought. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest. Isn't that what we're looking for? Doesn't that also describe a mansion or a room in my Father's house? It is a place prepared by God for you. Who's going to prepare the place? Jesus. Why? Because He values you. Listen, if God is going to prepare a place for you, can you imagine how wonderful? I don't think you can. But is there comfort and understanding is it is wonderful. So there's anticipation. 2 Peter 3:13, Peter records these words, but according to His promise. Jesus has promised. I go and if it was not so, I would not have told you that I am going to prepare a place. This is a promise. According to His promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. There are righteous individuals in our world. Righteousness does not dwell in this place. But in my Father's house, Jesus says, righteousness dwells. Peter recognizes that. Go ahead.
That new earth. You know, there's a slew of people who believe that you're really not going to go to heaven, but you're going to go to the new earth. If you start talking to people in religion,
there are people who give a lot of definitions to this verse,
yes.
But there's an awful lot of reasons why they're inaccurate.
Going to heaven or heaven.
And that's why we're studying and thinking about how does this apply to me? How do I teach this going forward? How do I understand? What is God communicating to me? Peter's saying simply we're waiting for that place where righteousness dwells. 2 Timothy, Paul will say in chapter 4, verse 8, henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. Why? Because of Paul's choices and obedience, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but to all of those who love His appearing. Paul is pointing at you as you strive to mature, to understand, to do better. Real quick, our time's up. Okay. Write down your thoughts, comments, questions, and we'll tackle them first thing next week. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate your help and insight. I enjoyed the class.